Wisdom here with us to talk about the issues arising in the relationship of religious belief and the emergence of transhumanist pursuit. So I'm very much looking forward to this, and I will integrate some of the discussions we had during our coffee breaks. That's there where the real discussions happen. So as to get a start on, we have witnessed during this conference that there is a need to talk about terminologies. There is some confusions, or there are not some new suggestions about terminologies. So I want to start with you, Stefan. And could you maybe elaborate your, just briefly again, what you mean by Euro-transhumanism because when we look at the Muslim perspectives who engage in this topic, they are all critical posthumanists, and you are very critical to critical posthumanists. But Professor Hoff mentioned maybe you are closer to critical posthumanists as you want to submit. How do you react?
No, I mean, that perspective is clearly sort of in between critical posthumanism and more, and what traditional accounts of transhumanism, without now having wanting to give sort of a clear definition of your transhumanism and distinguishing the very kinds. I think it was interesting to see sort of how closely connected is the use of words with some political intentions, with some which go along with it. And with Johannes Hoff, this was very interesting to have the discussion, sort of how to use the notions of duality with respect to what one in the end tries to say. So I'm highlighting, sort of for me, Descartes is sort of a clear representative of a categorical ontological duality. And based on such an understanding, so the transhumanists clearly are non-dualistic, because it all software hardware is part of the empirical realm. It's not in a realm of the mental. And then Johannes Hoff uses the terms in a completely different manner. In this way, he uses a term such that he could say, well, the transhumanists are dualistic, but Descartes is not. And it's sort of based on the definitions he's using that's totally making sense. The interesting thing is sort of the conclusion that both are ways in order to infer, well, sort of, for me it is a way to highlight, well, transhumanism is really, it doesn't have this discriminatory implications which go along with binary thinking, where in the case of Johannes Hoff, he would rather say, well, it does actually go along, it does promote racism and sexism and the binary implication. So there's a close connection between the use of words and sort of basically what one is trying to highlight within a discussion. Even though, just in order to stress sort of my own understanding, so the more widely shared use of the terms, is obviously that Descartes would affirm a type of substance dualism, which Johannes Hoff would reject.
No, would you react to clarify maybe what he means by promotes racist ideology?
First, you have to become clear about basic decision. Do you consider transhumanism as a philosophy or as a cultural narrative? There are people like Max Moore, Natasha Moore, they are the happy generation of philosophers where transhumanism emerged in the whole earth time. I think this is interesting in terms of history of culture, but I wouldn't consider transhumanism as a philosophy. It's a patchwork. For example, functionalism, somewhat outdated philosophy today, but is still relevant, is part of the 60s philosophy of mind. They adopted mainly classical transhumanists this type of philosophy, and they put it together and create a kind of narrative. But if you want to understand what transhumanism is, it's, I think, indeed better to talk about Star Trek than about philosophy. If you make this distinction between a kind of narrative that has features of a social pathology, in my perception, or a philosophy, then you have to adopt a different approach to it. You have to ask the question, how on earth is it possible that people think in this way? And this has deeper roots in our history of culture. And maybe he was talking about Descartes is the most interesting thing because he's the most, maybe the greatest thinker of modernity. I mean, by inclined to say he was more important than Kant, because he knew that he introduced a dualistic methodology. But he said it's just a methodology, it works very well. I know that animals are not machines, but let's start like that, then we will have precise science. And he has good reasons, because there was this idea that we can develop a theory of everything, Mathesis universalis. We know for logical and mathematical reasons today that this is not possible. The project has failed, and we know that Descartes didn't know that it will fail. So he had good reasons to think in this way, and now we are still in the habit of thinking in this 17th century way. Descartes would have been the first to realize, sorry, it was a good idea, but let's do it in a different way today. And then you have to take two steps. That's how I engage with these topics. First, I want to develop an anthropology that is based on a phenomenological ontology, which means, for example, first it's not a theory about things, but give a precise description of the phenomena you are talking about. What is time? What is consciousness? What is intentionality? It's not about a theory, it's a description. And then we have to ask which theories do justice to them. And why, for example, do we operate still with theories like functionalism? A theory that is self-contradictory because it doesn't explain what it wants to explain. It has no root in any experience. But you can explain how we came to the idea that this might work. And then we have to learn, for example, from medieval philosophy. In medieval philosophy, we, for example, know the distinction between real and conceptual distinction. If I have your piece of paper, there's a right and the left side of the paper. I can cut it in two parts. Separate the right part half from the left part. But do you then have the right paper? No, you have a paper with right and the left part. That's how we form and matter, or body and soul, why they can't be separated. Descartes was the first who, for methodological reasons, tried to separate it. And then there were people like Spinoza that would take it for granted, and then had problems which Descartes not really had. So that's why I say Descartes was dualist, but the worst dualist was Spinoza, because he took it for granted. And now we have to go back in time in order to rework these narratives and to say, well, we know why we introduced this distinction, but that did not really work. We have to be more sincere to reality. And then we talk also in a different way about transhumanism, because it's a patchwork of thinking patterns that are deeply rooted in our habits. We know that from the history of religion as well. Religions are tendentially conservative, they don't want to change, and then they think always in this kind of habit, and you have to be critical about that. And then you have a different terminology, because I start with the terminology starting from the question, do you accept this kind of dualistic distinction that we can separate between body and mind as two things? So the test case is simply, can you think that there is matter without form? If you think this is the case, then you are dualist in my perception. But again, this is we have to become what Husserl called rigorous science. Rigorous science starts with a precise description of the phenomena, take them seriously, and we have to combine it with severe engagement with the history of human thinking. And then we will also be able to understand phenomena like transhumanism, not as a philosophy, but as a narrative, a kind of story, which is heavily shaped by Star Trek Generation 1, I think more maybe than the later generations, and deeply rooted in our habits of thinking.
Thank you very much. So this, your reaction shows us how deep the discussion goes, because, promoted the idea that transhumanism is not really a philosophy, but a narrative. I know from our discussions that people would suggest that religion is also nothing more than a narrative. But building on that, I would like to turn to Professor Spiekermann-Hoff. So in your presentation, I didn't see mention of transhumanism as a form of philosophy. You prefer to speak of posthumanisms, of posthuman philosophies. So do you agree with the assertion that transhumanism can be a philosophy, and that's why you prefer to use the term posthumanism, radical posthumanism, critical posthumanism, and so on?
The reason why I adopted this posthumanistic term is because it's dominant in the literature. And I have after this presentation and the debate, I will change my presentation of the study. What I will do is I will simply take the 26 beliefs about the truth and throw them in the world. And you will see that there are a couple of people, that there are bundles of beliefs. And whether you call this transhumanism, posthumanism, or something else, the only discernment I see in the data is that some of these beliefs are really essentially related to philosophical structures of thinking, and some others are merely political. They are agenda-driven. And so I discern rather between political and philosophical, but I will not use any of these terms anymore because I believe that they just create confusion.
Okay, so what would you prefer to speak about the discourse, if you have to name it? Would you say transhumanism is part of posthumanist discourse, or the other way around, or would you restrain from classifying?
I think with what I said, it goes in line that it doesn't make any sense to classify and categorize one amongst the other, because even in those groups that they call themselves like this or that, they don't agree on things. Yeah. So to categorize 10,000 different people with 10,000 different ideologies doesn't make any sense. So for me, at least, I will go back to the belief structures, and in the future I will just talk about the beliefs like, do you believe that technology is superior to biology? Do you believe? And then you have 23 or 26 beliefs, and you see how they correlate, and that's it. And I'm not going to give it any names anymore because I think it's just confusing.
Okay. I would like to ask you more questions, but we will maybe come later. But now I will turn to my dear friend Maurizio Balistreri, and you expressed that you are not a religious person engaging with these topics, and Professor Spiekermann-Hoff asked a question to Professor Gressel in saying that, okay, how does dignity play in without metaphysics? Can we speak about a human dignity without metaphysics? So, coming from an atheist perspective, how would you react to this question?
This is a good and important question that we have to discuss, and something that we have always to consider when we talk about the possible use of new technologies. But at the same time, I think that we should consider that when we deal with new technologies, when new technologies loom in the horizon, we have to consider that we have a bias in favor of the status quo. And so the first reaction in front of the new technologies is rejection. And so we tend to think that the new technologies are incompatible with human dignity, with our value, and with the respect of future generation. It happened already with assisted reproduction 50 years ago, when doctors were doing the first attempt of creating embryo, in vitro embryo, the polls say that the people, the reaction, the attitude of people were negative towards assisted reproduction. 85% of the population in America said, oh, this is unacceptable, we should not create in vitro embryo. After 50 years, our attitude towards assisted reproduction is completely changed. Now we perceive assisted reproduction as something natural, something that we should use if we are not able to have a child sexually. And so we have to consider that our perception can change fast, and so we have to consider this aspect when we discuss the new technologies, and when we have to consider this aspect when we consider the current attitude of the population toward the new technologies. We have to consider that this attitude could change. And then I would say Stefan talked about the distinction between European and mild transhumanism with a radical transhumanism. And I understand the need of doing distinction, but at the same time, we have to outline the common aspect of the transhumanism. I mean, I think that it is important to consider that different schools tend to outline the need of using new technologies to improve the human condition, to improve the quality of life of the future generations. And I think this is an important aspect to consider. Then we could have different ideas. Also, within the European transhumanism, we could have we could find different ideas, and this is important to consider. We have to promote the debate, the discussion, the possibility of express different voices in order to understand better our reality and our present condition.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, Aslıgül, there is a reaction from Professor Hoff.
Yeah, just a short reaction. You say we have a negative bias against innovations, but I don't agree with that, because we have so many innovations that have entered into our human life like instantly. If you think about email and internet, World Wide Web usage, smartphone usage, we have so many technologies where humans intuitively say yes, and that's the majority of the technologies we use. And then there are technologies where we don't do that. And I think it's very important also when you make that claim that you have that in mind. And I am just wondering, and we could wonder about it, why do humans perhaps sometimes have doubts? Is doubt, human doubt, wise? And isn't there a difference, and that's in the last one, isn't there a difference between top-down and bottom-up innovation? There is bottom-up innovation, we have new ways of doing things, and very often people love it. As soon as it works, wow, they flock to it. But then there is a lot of top-down innovation and imposing, like the young couple, political transhumanism, where human experiments are done in the labs. And that's where, you see, I think there is a triangle, bottom-up, top-down, immediate embracing versus skepticism.
Thank you very much. Would you like to react? Or?
Just a short comment. I think that we have to look at the past. I mean, we tend to forget that that in the past we introduced a lot of innovations, that we changed the condition of our children, of our generations, and we have to consider that the new generations tend to change, to reshape their worlds. And this is a big innovation, a big change, and we cannot stop the change, the innovation. We have to deal with the capacity of future generations to fix the problems, to discuss the issues that the new technologies can introduce. But I think that we should not think that we are able to stop, to block the innovation. The innovation is there, and it is usable, and we have to use the new technologies in a responsible way.
So we are already seeing from the speakers what they talked about. Once is transhumanism a philosophy leading to questions of what is the nature of philosophy and can any style of thought can be thought of philosophy? Then is religion kind of philosophy, or religion is it a separate thing, and how do we relate to each other? And then we have the Muslim perspective, and I guess the Muslim perspective is a new player in this discourse. So what is the perspective of a Muslim thinker about these questions? Should Muslims perceive these the rise of transhumanism as a threat, or as is it compatible with Muslim lifestyles?
So thank you. So a quick look to transhumanism shows that there are lots of fields, as you said 2 days ago. So we've got this field of nanotechnology, biotechnology, life extension, and so on and so on. And they have their own goals. Yeah? And if you just take these goals and compare it with Islamic concepts, then there might be similarities. Yeah? So when it comes to, for example, longevity, you can have a long life if you want to. The thing is, it is not going through some pills or whatever. It's about praising and praying God. And if you have good deeds, indeed, then you might have a longer life if you have this permission from God. It is possible to Islam. Or medical improvement. So Islam encourages to do more scientific work in medicine here. And as I said yesterday, there is no disease without a cure. Yeah? And when it comes to science at all in general, so Islam encourages to do more science. Yeah? So there are similarities. If this is transhumanism, but if the main goal of transhumanism is to substitute God with mankind, to have the control over the mankind, to achieve immortality maybe, and you said no. So, but if this is the main goal, then it gets a little bit more tricky and dangerous. So in this field, it contradicts completely to Islam, because Islam is God-centric, yeah, and everything is about God. And to say this a little more provocatively, we are slaves of God, and we are fine with that. That's fine, yeah. You see, there are similarities, but when it comes to this question, it contradicts, and it will fall under the shirk, and this is the greatest sin at all. In these cases, I have to deal more with transhumanism, yeah? Because you said, as I get you rightly, this is not right. Transhumanism doesn't want to achieve immortality, and you don't know where this comes from. So maybe, okay. And there are even, have I said?
Yeah.
there are even, I want to tell a story about space and time traveling. This is possible in Islam too, yeah, but not with new technologies. On the contrary, if you go to inner yourself, it is possible. So we have this in Tasawwuf, and great Sufi masters, they call Awliya. Awliya has these possibilities to do that. And there was a story, I want to tell you this. There was a man, and he wants to make fun of a great Sufi master, Abdul Qadir Jailani. And he went to him, and this man lived in the 11th century. And he went to him, and he wants to just make fun of him. And Abdul Qadir Jailani, he said to him, yeah, we can talk later. First of all, he wants to do his praying, and he told him, can you just hold my towel or hang it up there? So, and this man takes the towel, and as he hangs it up, he was in another world. So, and there was a man, a master doing woodwork, carpentry, and this man, he lived with him for years, and he learned the art of carpentry, woodwork, and after some years, 2 or 3 years maybe, the master, he died, and this man get married with his wife and get also some children. So yeah, and then he was also getting a master in woodwork, and he wants to pray, and he took his towel, and as he hung it up, he was back right beneath Abdul Qadir Jailani, and then he thought it was like waking up from a dream. It felt very real, but he came back, and he was so surprised, and at this moment he understand, okay, this is a person, an Awliya, a Sufi or a master, who can open the doors for the fourth dimension, where space and time traveling is reality. Yeah. And this is the reason why Awliya is also, they are seen on 2 places at the same time. And it was possible, but this is only then possible if you go into yourself, and by praying, iman, by faith, by ibadah, by praying, and by akhlaq, morality. These are the points which is so important, and it takes for sure some time. So maybe these are the challenges and the similarities.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, you are correct, of course.
Yeah, many thanks for so correctly summarizing and highlighting sort of the issue of an increased health span rather than immortality. I do not know any serious transhumanist who actually means to aspire or sees immortality in the literal sense as a goal. And even if you think about it in any way, it cannot even be conceptualized any kind of imminent immortality. However, what is generally shared is that an increased health span is a widely shared interest, and that's one of the common functions which all, most if not all transhumanists do affirm. And there are various ways of doing so. And one of the issues which applies, and I think this is from how I see things, I don't think there has to be any conflict actually. Maybe in the contrast, maybe it should also be first from a Catholic perspective, and maybe also from a Muslim perspective. In the way what is being done as part of realizing that goal of an increased health span is sort of traditionally we do diets and exercises and have a rational way of thinking about life in order to live longer healthily. And then in addition to that, now what is being attempted is the use of biotechnology in order to realize a body modification, in order to increase the likelihood of that having, increasing the likelihood of that being the case. Of course, it could always be the case, that you die earlier. But that's all. In both cases, it's just a body modification in order that's the same thing with an exercise, no, or diets as well, in order to live longer healthily. And you know, in the Bible you find so many 120 years old, Methuselah even longer, and so far we live in the average 80 years. So there's even like there might be even the moral duty to demand 40 more years. And the same thing, you know, the same thing seems to apply also from a Muslim perspective, if that logic applies. So from that, given that there doesn't seem to be any kind of conflict concerning the goal of an increased health span, so from transhumanist perspective or from the perspectives of these monotheistic understandings.
I think this is a good example where you can see how you can adopt a different, and I would prefer a more philosophical, and in this case, social philosophical perspective on this topic. I think Johannes in his paper had a very good definition of immortality. Immortality is when you do no longer care about your death. That was brilliant. I think this is what people think is immortality. That no one seriously believes that we can live forever, but it's like in Tolstoy's novel Ivan Ilyich, everyone is mortal, X is mortal, so he will die, but I'm not X. So we don't care for death. And this is not a purely theological question. In Aristotle, in Plato and Socrates, philosophy is, and wisdom is, care for your death. You should every day think that you can die today. There is no technology, no science, which will help you from that. It can prolong your life, that might be nice. But at the end, if you live longer, it's a gift, or we would call it grace. That's in Islamic tradition not different from in the Christian tradition. And we have a culture of suppression of that, because we think science can solve this problem. And when we are then died, we pretend that it has nothing to do with us. And we are no longer even able to celebrate a funeral ritual. So if we adopt not a pseudo-philosophical, but a really philosophical perspective on this problem, and take seriously that our society has a problem with death. It's a typical sign of lack of wisdom, that's a pathology, and transhumanism here is a typical example of this pathology, and I would insist. And transhumanists believe in immortality, and if someone asks, what do you mean with immortality? I would use your definition. Immortality is when someone thinks, we have science and the doctor, I don't need to care about my death. That's the definition of immortality, and this is the mentality I find in, I don't buy you a distinction between European and classical transhumanism. I say transhumanism is narrative, it's based on power and the market. If you have a company for many billion money in the market, and then you say, I'm now doing European transhumanism, then we can discuss about it again, but I think you're not at this point at the moment, so I think it's a rather idiosyncratic position to talk about European transhumanism. There is the transhumanism, that's the big five, or might be more today, and it's Elon Musk, etc. They have the power to implement these technologies, and they boost an ethical attitude and not wise way to deal with life that is suppressive of that. And that our society suppresses that. Every sociology would confirm that. That's not a very surprising discovery.
Before I allow Stefan to react to that, there's Maurizio and want to...
My question is whether we may reject every kind of transhumanism. We have to consider that therapy is strictly linked with enhancement. Every time that we promote, that we introduce a new therapy, we are producing an enhancement. We allow future generations to be, for instance, more resistant, to have a life longer. We increase the lifespan. And so we cannot reject enhancement, because in order to reject enhancement, we should reject therapy as well, but we don't intend to reject therapy. And so we have to accept enhancement as well.
Thank you. First, Professor Peter.
Yeah, I think perhaps it would be wise to distinguish between progress and progression.
Yeah.
So in the last 100 years or so, progress has made itself independent, riding on science fiction like Star Trek. So progress became an end in itself. And I think that's problematic. I think that's against any of the faith traditions. Whilst progression, no? That we progress through our lives and that God or Allah gives us gifts, where we detect things suddenly and then are able to use them to perhaps prolong our life a little bit. This is progression. And I think perhaps it would be wise to rather talk in the future about progression than progress. And trans and post, after the human. What is that trans? Overcoming or going beyond, or this is all, I fear it might be hubris.
Well, I have my first ally, I guess, with my suspicions on the concept of progress. As of now, I was rejected by that point, so that's nice to hear. Before I come to you, Stefan, I'd like to, you mentioned in your presentation that you were surprised that the issue of faith was discussed within a conference concerning transhumanism and scientific questions. Would you see religion and transhumanist pursuits as not compatible, or science and religion as such? And then I continue.
I think that all real scientific progress is a gift of God, and we should see it like that. And where people engage too much in massaging their own fictions and make science out of their own fictions, I think it's a waste of time. They should rather meditate.
Okay, thank you. Maybe could you also say a bit about progress and the criticism of it?
Once you've undermined an absolute notion of truth, sort of even the notion of progress no longer applies, because you need a criterion, essentialist criterion of truth, and given an ontology of permanent becoming, so this criterion vanishes. So we don't have an eternally valid essentialist concept of progress either. However, we have some contingent criteria. We say now, sort of 200 years ago, like people lived in the average 40 years, now we lived in the average 80 years globally. And that's, most people like that, and that is progress, but it's a contingent notion of progress. So that might change in different circumstances. And it's not just living longer, it's usually sort of what in the interest of people is living longer healthily. But even in a country like Germany 50 years ago, it was like the average life expectancy was 15 years less. Now it's 15 years higher. On an individual level, that makes an enormous difference concerning the quality of life. And that's what I'm sort of, here we also see, we've just seen a very rhetoric use of immortality, of the attempt to redefine immortality by saying not caring about death. But in the end, who's not caring about death? That's a very naive understanding. That's not, any serious person would have to somehow care about death and be concerned with death, because it can always happen, either with a car accident, or you get on the wrong plane, or as a pandemic. So we're permanently confronted, and we'll never be able to transcend death in an imminent form. So it's absolutely absurd to even aim for that. However, on the other hand, sort of just, and that is, even also on the basis of let's look at some parables in the Bible, and so the parable of the talents, God giving talents to two brothers, and one person taking the talents and hiding them under the ground, the other one using them, investing them, multiplying them, and who gets the reward? Who uses the talents and multiplies them. And if our scientific gifts aren't the talents, the talents we use in order to sort of also increase our health span. These are what our talents are all about. So also from that basis, it clearly needs to be seen that it might even be seen as a moral duty to work and to increase the likelihood of increasing our health span.
Just a short sentence to clarify the definition of Johannes Köstler. I consider immortality in this sense, not to care about that, is when we treat death as an accident and not as something which is essential for human life and growth and happiness. And this, you can say no one believes in eternal life in transhumanism, but in almost every transhumanist text, they treat death as an illness. Who talks about in this way, I'm not talking about you, again, then it's very clear that he doesn't understand what the meaning of death is in human life.
I just, so do you think that Christianity would have meant more progress for people if Jesus had lived longer than just 32 years? So it's interesting that the central figure in Christianity actually hasn't lived very long. And I think we must also perhaps ask why that was the case and what it actually means. And then I also think that there are many spiritual traditions. For example, I heard one time a story about Japanese traditions where Karl Graf Dürkheim wrote, the Japanese are an interesting kind of people. They have two legs. One is standing in the realm of eternity and basically what's happening after life, and one that is just here on earth. And the Japanese actually have that one leg, which is in this world, is actually the weaker leg. The stronger leg is the one that is resides in eternity. And that's interesting because it shows me that obviously other cultures have a different relation to the eternal life that doesn't really care about death. And so these are just two comments on where I would just question whether progress means to live longer. I think that's a little bit superficial.
Very short, one sentence, really just. I don't think imitating the life of Jesus Christ means to live as long as Jesus Christ did. So this might have the implications of what you just said. So that cannot really be meant by Christianity.
I was thinking that our life is technology-based. We use electricity, we drive cars, we travel by train, by plane. My child will travel by rocket. And so when we talk about technology, we should explain. We should not talk about technology in general. We should explain which kind of technology we refer to when we criticize technology. Otherwise, it makes no sense what we are saying, because we use every day the technologies, and technologies are part of our life, and so we should distinguish which technology we accept and which technology we intend to criticize and why.
Dear Maurizio, I want to stay with you. Speaking of technologies, well, I'm arguing that we are, in fact, living in a transhumanist world, as one might criticize it as a philosophy as such. But given that our world is dominated by the goals of transhumanist pursuit. You wrote a book recently published on sex robots. So let's stay with technology and the relationship on ethics. We had a little discussion of the implications of having sex robots, with people who have dark fantasies maybe. Would this lead, the engagement with technological progress, would this lead to a betterment of human, that if they can just filter their dark needs through technological mediators, is it good, or is it rather the other way around, that we amplify and normalize the experience of living the dark fantasies?
I think that instead of rejecting a priori the new technologies, we should promote empirical studies in order to understand the possible advantages of the new technologies. And so I don't have a precise answer to your question, but I think that we should conduct empirical studies to understand if people can be helped with these technologies, and we can use these technologies to reduce the crimes that some people can carry out.
Thank you. Before I open the discussion to our audience, quick question to you, Aslıgül. After all what you hear on this panel, do you feel now closer to post-humanist philosophy, and do you think that it would be a worthwhile commitment to think Muslim theology or philosophy or social studies in the lines reflecting on these issues?
No, absolutely not. So thank you for this question. We have to be careful with this. So I see some similarities, yeah, that's true. But on the other case, the Islamic thought is if you do science, if you do technology and so on, there are two criteria that should be that we should pay attention to. The first one is the principle of maslahah, public welfare. This is completely important. And the second one is Islamic ethical standards. And if we do science or technology that just a few people or group benefit from it, and maybe it causes inequality in other fields or to other groups or nationalities, then the principle of maslahah isn't there. So we have to be cautious with that. Yeah.
So we should forbid sex robots.
No, I don't mean that. So science and science and technology in general, yeah, or progress. So in this case, and as I said, I'm a little bit afraid of this main goal or main idea, immortality and controlling and substitute God. When it comes to this, it gets dangerous, yeah. But as you said it yesterday and the day before, transhumanism is not that at all, or post-humanism, and there are different definitions. And as I see it here today, we are not, there is not just one definition. Is it a philosophy? Is it a religion? Or is it just a new technology? So, but my point of view as a researcher in the field of Islamic religious pedagogy is that when it comes to educational processes, then we should also take these Islamic competencies like tafakkur to think and to reflect about new technologies and involving with these two criteria, maslahah, public welfare, and ethical standards. That is completely important. And if we could do that, then we should maybe go with the transhumanism movement, but without replacing mankind with God.
So the disruptions between Islamic thinking and transhumanist pursuit seems not so incompatible as one might think. So with that, I'd like to open the room for the audience if you have questions. Johannes was mentioned several times in this podium, so I'm happy to hear your reaction.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have a question to everyone on the podium that can give short answers, what you think. I heard a little bit that technological progress is sometimes in opposition to spiritual progress. But what do you think, how can technology be used for spiritual or religious progress?
So, robot or imam and so on.
And anything.
I can't give a generally valid answer, because I do take seriously, actually, there's a great diversity of different concepts of the good, and I do think that sort of, as many people as there are, they different concept understanding what it means to live a good life, and different concept of what it means to live a spiritual life. And taking that seriously, that means, and basically what you're answering for one technology which applies to everyone, I would say there's no such technology. The best we can realize is not a total control of everything. That cannot be even realized either. Just to get a little bit control over the enormous amount of dangers we're currently confronted with. We're getting ill, we're getting killed. We get pandemics, we have volcano eruptions, we have earthquakes, we've got asteroids hitting Earth, and that danger is and we just try to get a little bit of control and reduce the likelihood of dying too young. That's all. All the other questions of, what will happen after and spirituality, you need to find an answer for that yourself, and then to apply the appropriate technologies in order to get there. But that's all I can say.
Yeah, I think in the Christian tradition we have a very positive understanding of technology. Already before the fall, Adam was working in a garden using technology and using linguistic tools to name the things of the world, which is grammar. There was never a human being without technology. Our life is always embedded in technology. But we have a problem in the 20th century because of the acceleration of technological innovations, which requires us to rethink what technology is. What is technology? This is the biggest question of our time. And here I would not agree with you. The most deep misunderstanding about what technology is technology is a tool that gives us control. Technology always changes our life in completely unpredictable ways. There has never been a technology that we can control, because it's always embedded in a social life, in an infrastructure. We might think we can prolong our life and enhance our intelligence, and then we will get an ecological crisis because the artificial intelligence are eating our whole energy resources, and everything gets out of control. The point is, we can only, in the Christian tradition, I think, technology is related to what is wisdom. In the book of wisdom, wisdom was playing before God. Technology has something playful, and human beings are playful beings. They always try to do it. But we have to slow our progress down, and we have to develop interactive social strategies that make sure technologies are assimilated and integrated in our form of life. This cannot be done in a top-down way. It has to be on a bottom-up way. And there's the second thing. First, technology gives us no control, and there has never been a value-neutral technology. It's always value-saturated. And it's a spiritual practice to discern between good and evil. On the one hand, we are living beings, and technology transforms our life. Our essence is never predetermined. We have ever been transhumanists in this sense. That's why I think this term is not very helpful. On the other hand, we have a problem because of the acceleration of progress, and here we have to develop new forms of life that help us to understand what technology is, what power it has in our life, magic power, I would say, with Renaissance thinkers, and that everyone who is part of a technological society has a responsibility for the way it changes our way of life and change who we are. It's not a tool that enables us to do things we want to do, good or evil, but it changes who we are, and we have to develop a new sensitivity. And this is progress. That would be, it would make us wiser persons. This would be the key progress.
I need to correct how you summarized my position. I mean, I wrote a book on We've Always Been Cyborgs. That clearly says I don't have a functional understanding of technology. It is a means, but it also changes who we are. So just to highlight that. And secondly, of course technology helps us to control. You know, we've got antibiotics, they kill bacteria, and that's a lot of help in our lives.
I tried to directly answer to you. I think we can discern between mid-technology and high technology. And simple apps like meditation apps and so on, I have seen myself, actually my sister, many friends, that meditation apps were really good at the start. So this is very simple technology, but it can help. And also, if we design technologies such that they really save us time, it's a matter of system design actually, then you also have more freedom to follow spiritual practice. It's just that we have to build the machines differently than we do it today, where they harvest our attention.
Yesterday we talked about space traveling, today you talk about Star Trek. So I could say that maybe technology, space exploration, space colonization could allow people to live a spiritual experience. Astronauts traveling into the space say that by watching the planet Earth, they have a special feeling, a spiritual feeling, and so maybe some people can feel themselves closer to God, and this could be a possibility open to people with space travel.
So technologies are, or just science at all, they are really important in Islam, from the Islamic point of view. And the mankind is, it's a trustee khilafah on earth. So we have the responsibility to take care over the world, the earth, the human beings, animals, nature, and so on. But in case of spirituality, spirituality needs a little more. That means, on the contrary, you have to go in distance, and to strengthen your faith by rituals and by good moral akhlaq, And in this case, you get a little bit more spiritual. This is the reason, for example, why we fast. So Ramadan is coming. We go in distance from the things that we really need. That means eating and drinking. So for a short period of time, we don't use these things. That allows us to strengthen our empathy, and that allows us even to go to inner self, even by praying, to go to inner self. This is for these reasons, all these rituals. And in this case, technologies do not open the doors for spirituality. It's another case. You need more to go in distance to all these resources to go to inner self. But as a trustee on earth, we have to take care over earth and over all the things human beings and lives on. And in this case, we need technologies to do science, Because the first word in Quran is ikra, read. It means read and reflect about it. Yeah? So it doesn't combine maybe or doesn't go hand in hand. There are two parts, but they are both important in Islam, or to my mind.
I also like to thank you for your question because no, I expressed my own thoughts maybe to your question. It is what I was very fascinated when I heard once that somebody who couldn't make it to the Kaaba, every Muslim is expected to visit Kaaba once in a lifetime. So there's this one woman who couldn't make it there, but her friends were going there to Hajj, and she said, okay, let us FaceTime. And I will then make a tawaf, the circling around the Kaaba with you. So I will also have met the Kaaba. Yeah, well, this raises sorts of a lot of legal questions, Islamic legal questions. Are you allowed to do that? Is this accepted as a prayer? And secondly, well, the spirituality part. Islam is really easy going on how you pray because you don't need the virtual reality spaces in COVID times to meet in a mosque in the metaverse because you just do it here and it's okay. But in the case of the Kaaba, I'm not sure if, well, she definitely checked one, I made the virtual Hajj part, but if it given her something special as someone who's been one time in Kaaba, it's a different thing witnessing this through a screen or headset, virtual reality headset, than being there and breathing this air, the surroundings, the smells, and so on. This all puts in a lot into what you perceive as spirituality. And something happens when you're in front of the Kaaba for the first time, everyone leaves. I'm not a Weaver guy, right? So I'm not sure if you get this with virtual reality headsets. So sorry for my intervention. Are there any more questions from the audience? If not, I would like to thank you all for your invaluable participation in this conference. I'm truly honored that you all accepted my invitation. So this was the first conference of its kind, especially from the perspective of Islamic theology and especially from the new emerging Islamic theological institutes in Germany. This is the first of its kind, and I couldn't be more honored that you took on this journey which has started today. Thank you very much.